Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 7th of July of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, and we will start with the NATO summit that today started on the territory of Turkey in the city of Ankara. We have lots of statements being made already by different leaders of different countries. They were talking lots about Ukraine, about Russia, about the Middle East, and many other different topics were raised by different leaders. Let's discuss the most important of them, and let's talk about the topics that are related to the special military operation. The President of the United States of America stated that he had a very good and lengthy conversation with the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and expressed confidence that the Russian President and Zelensky are ready to strike a deal. At the same time, the President of Ukraine made lots of very interesting statements. He said that Ukraine must be in NATO because NATO with Ukraine is the alliance of the future. This is the first statement made by the President of Ukraine, Zelensky. Another one is that Europe needs its own effective anti-ballistic systems and missiles, and this work is already underway. So very difficult to say what kind of deal the President of the United States of America was talking about, but it seems that neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are ready for this deal, or at least the Russians will never accept the deal where the Ukrainians would have their own anti-ballistic missile systems and where Ukrainians will be a part of NATO. So, which means that the conflict on the territory of Ukraine will continue. And during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of very interesting updates. The Russians, according to information we have, continue attacking the territory of Ukraine, continue attacking logistic hubs, gas stations, and the most important, the railway logistics. So let's discuss everything in details. And first, let's talk about strikes that were carried out by Russians on Ukraine's logistics and railway service. In this video, we can see how the Russians, using drones, were attacking trucks, for example, for the logistic purposes. In this video, we can see several trucks destroyed in the area of the settlement by the name of Chumaki. Furthermore, in the area of the settlement of Sinelnikova, the Russians discovered a train that the Ukrainians were using to bring munition in the area of the line of combat contact, and as a result of attacks, both trains were destroyed by Russians. Moving further, the settlement of Pavlograd, here we have the same situation. A train was discovered by Russians, and then the train was destroyed by Russians. In the same area, we have a parking site in the most western parts of the city, and here we can see how the Russians first discovered this parking site with trucks that most likely the Ukrainians were using to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia, and then the Russians attacked this parking site and destroyed. Moving further, and here we have the Kharkiv direction, the settlement of Blizniki. Here we have more locomotives that the Ukrainians were using to bring munition as close as possible to the line of combat contact. But when the locomotive was discovered by Russians, the locomotive was destroyed immediately. So as you can see, during the previous 24 hours, up to 5 locomotives were discovered by Russians and destroyed as a result of attacks with drones. The city of Kharkiv, the most southern parts of the settlement, here we have this parking site. Even from this satellite picture, we can see dozens of trucks that were located in this area. And when the Russians discovered this position, the Russians attacked this territory. So these are the strikes that were carried out by Russians during the previous probably 2 or 3 days. And we see that currently the Russians, as a result of such a control, managed to establish almost complete control over the territory that is located inside of this black area. So we're talking about the territory through the Kharkiv, Pavlograd, Dnipro, Zaporozhye, Kherson, and Nikolaev regions. And as you can see, most of the updates and most of the icons are located in this area, which means that the Russians have strong control over these territories. The Russians don't attack single targets like single vehicles and so on, but if Russians see either a gas station or the locomotive or a parking site or a concentration of trucks, then these targets would be attacked attacked by the Russians in the first priority. As for this territory, during the previous 24 hours, also several gas stations were destroyed. For example, in the northwestern parts of the city of Dnipro, in the area of the settlement of Kamenskaya, this gas station was destroyed, which is located along N08 road, and this video was published today by pro-Russian sources. Here we can see a civilian moving through this territory, and here we can see a civilian recording the status of the current gas station, which was, as you can see, completely destroyed as a result of attack carried out by Russians. The northeastern parts of the Dnipro direction, here we have lots of warehouses destroyed by Russians and logistic hubs that the Russians attacked during the previous 24 hours. This parking site was attacked by Russians. From this angle we can see also lots of trucks on the territory of this facility. Furthermore, the Russians, as a result of attack, destroyed this territory. Here we have the Nova Poshta logistic hub, and here we have a video where we can see that this logistic hub was completely destroyed. A fire broke out right after the Russians attacked this territory. Furthermore, another logistic hub was destroyed by Russians through this territory of the city of Kryvyi Rog, and we are talking about this Nova Poshta, the post office terminal. We can see also lots of trucks in this area, and for example, this video was published by pro-Russian sources, and here we can see a very big fire that broke out right after the Russians attacked this facility. Here we have civilians moving through this area and filming the facility that has been struck by Russians and most likely completely destroyed. And as we discussed, as we started this, let's say, a type of fuel war and logistic war, start discussion of this war probably 2 months ago, and during this period of time the Russians have destroyed hundreds of gas stations, probably dozens of logistic hubs, and probably dozens of parking sites and service centers where the Ukrainians repair or maintain different trucks and vehicles. So, and the Russians, as we can see, created a very big buffer zone between the central part of Ukraine and the territory along the line of combat contact. As of the end of the 7th of July of 2026, probably the current situation and the current Russian pressure have already affected the Ukrainian soldiers and the Ukrainian military along the line of combat contact, but probably still we can't see it and we can't feel it. But telling the truth, if the Russians continue doing the same things, attacking the same objects along the same territories, obviously within months or by the end of the summer or during the beginning of fall of 2026, the armed forces of Ukraine will feel it and will understand what is happening right now. And from this very moment, it would be very difficult for the Ukrainians to hold the lines. And this is the main reason why Zelensky started talking about the anti-ballistic systems, because he understands that he can't establish and create enterprises on the territory of Ukraine, because if Zelensky and Ukraine build another military enterprise on the territory of Ukraine, this enterprise could be destroyed during the next massive wave of a massive attack. So that is why he can't do this. So first of all, it is very important for the Ukrainian side, first of all, to create the anti-ballistic air defense systems and to create several enterprises that can build either PAC-3 interceptors or something similar, and only when it happens, from this very moment, the Ukrainians will be able to stabilize the situation in the air. And you know that the most important thing about this situation, Zelensky has already started talking about production of PAC-3 interceptors. He started talking about license and so on. And telling the truth, if the European countries and Ukraine have already started talking about the PAC-3 interceptors, or analog of these type of interceptors. This means that the Ukrainians have already these capabilities to start production of these type of missiles. The only problem is that the Ukrainians are not able to legalize this production, so that is why they're just trying to finalize all these things with papers, with documents, and when it happens, the Ukrainians will be able even maybe to start using them. Maybe the Ukrainians have already finished production of finished construction of this enterprise somewhere through the western parts of Ukraine that is capable of producing of these PAC-3 interceptors, but the Ukrainians are not able to reveal this site, this enterprise, because they can't do this due to some license agreements with the United States of America. But the thing is that Ukraine is running out of time, because every single next massive attack can lead to significant destruction through the military chains of supply and production, and with these massive attacks, sooner or later the Russians would be able to hit this enterprise as well. And furthermore, as for the massive attacks, probably since the beginning of this year, the Russians dealt significant damage to enterprises, logistics, gas stations, fuel infrastructure, gas infrastructure through the central and the eastern parts of Ukraine. And the central and the eastern parts of Ukraine, and today several mayors and of the western parts of Ukraine began saying and talking that during the next massive attacks, the Russians most likely will shift their focus further in the western direction with the purpose to begin attacking the same facilities through the western parts of Ukraine. And when it starts happening, then this is going to be something like probably even a turning point in the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, especially when we start receiving so many updates about the conflict between Poland and Ukraine regarding different questions. So which means that who knows how the state of Poland is going to act with Ukraine, with supply and support, with transit of weapons, at the beginning of 2027. Everything is possible. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 12 hours, the Ukrainians also attacked deep inside of the territory of Russia, and when this attack ended, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation stated that the Ukrainians were using 452 drones just during the overnight attack. The Ukrainians, according to pro-Russian sources, using HIMARS systems, attacked the city of Belgorod, and in these videos we can see the consequences of attack. The Ukrainians hit and damaged several objects of energy infrastructure, several substations, and the Ukrainians hit the gas facility or something like this. And according to pro-Russian sources, the Ukrainians attacked the Azov Sea. So this territory was attacked, and when this attack finished, first, we received this fire anomaly through the Azov Sea, and here we have a very important video where we can see hundreds, maybe dozens, maybe hundreds of tankers, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, that belong to the shadow fleet of the Russian Federation. And here we have how the Ukrainians were attacking these tankers with drones. So it seems that the Russians found a very interesting solution how to store fuel and maybe even oil. The Russians, due to huge problems with ground facilities, with surface facilities through the territory of the Russian Federation, probably decided to keep some reserves, to keep some oil and fuel probably on tankers. So, and as you can see, there are hundreds of tankers in this area, and the Ukrainians attacked several of them. As you can see, the Ukrainians weren't attacking the ships themselves, so the places where the Russians keep oil and fuel. The Ukrainians were attacking engine parts of these vessels with the purpose to block them through the Sea of Azov. So this is the situation in this area. And most likely, due to this picture, we have hundreds of vessels. We believe that the Ukrainians will continue this process, and during the next probably 20-30 days, the Ukrainians will try to hit every single vessel in this area until the Russians are able to stabilize the situation. But due to the current situation with mid-range and long-range strikes, this is going to be a very difficult situation for Russians. But the Russians are trying to stabilize the situation. Once again, the Russians have already destroyed dozens of gas stations and warehouses through the Nikolaev, Kherson, and Dnipropetrovsk regions. And when the Russians finish the situation, of course, the Ukrainians would be forced to move their launching sites deeper inside of the territory of Ukraine. And if Ukraine begins attack the territory of Azov Sea and Crimea from these territories, of course, the Russians would have additional time to react and to repel these attacks. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to happen next. But one thing is clear, that this summer military campaign differs from every single military campaign since the beginning of the special military operation. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Orekhov direction, because something is brewing in this area. During the previous 24 hours, we continued receiving updates from the central part of the city of Orekhov, where we can see how the Russians were reducing to ruins the central part of the city, the Orekhov citadel, and the Russians started attacking the northern and the central parts of the Orekhov agglomeration several days ago, and almost every single day we receive a video from this area where we can see how exactly the Russians were wiping out this part of the city, the most important part of the city, basically the heart of the Orekhov agglomeration. And all these videos of attacks in the central part of the Orekhov agglomeration means that the Russians are preparing themselves before the beginning of the ground operation and clashes through the agglomeration itself. So the Russians most likely in coming days will begin their major offensive operation in this area. As for the Zaporozhye direction itself, just small changes were recorded to the west of the settlement of Gulyai-Polska. Several mappers extended the infiltration zone in this area towards the city of Orekhov and Preobrazhenka. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Dnipro direction. During the previous 24 hours and during the previous probably 72 hours, the Russians have improved their position significantly in this area. Almost every single day we have changes on the ground through these territories. They're not so big, but we see that the Russian offensive operation is gaining momentum. For example, this is the end of the 30th of June of 2026. Let's rewind a bit earlier. This is the end of the 29th of June of 2026, and this is approximately the moments when the Russians began their major Pavlograd offensive operation. During the 30th and by the end of the 30th of June of 2026, we received the report that Russians broke through Ukraine's defense in the east through the eastern parts of the city of Dobropolye and entered the city itself. Furthermore, the Russians managed to encircle the settlement of Belitska and to cut the contingent of the armored forces of Ukraine from supply and support. During the 1st of July of 2026, we received a report published by pro-Ukrainian sources that the armored forces of the Russian Federation entered the settlement of Shevchenka in this area and managed to dig in deeper. During the next dates between the 1st and the 7th of July of 2026, the Russians were improving their position significantly through the territory between Novopodgorodnya and Belitska, and the Russians improved their positions through the settlement of Shevchenka, and currently up to 50% of the village is already under the Russian control. Furthermore, during the same period of time, the Russians began advancing in the area of the village of Sergeyevka from the south, from the east, and from the northeast. During the same period of time, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation also reported that the village of Vasilievka was captured by Russians and that the Russians entered the eastern parts of the settlement of Sergeyevka and that the Russians managed to dig in deeper. As of the current situation, the Dobropolye or the Pavlograd direction is the most dynamic direction. Almost every single day the map is being adjusted in the Russian favor and the Russians continue advancing. It seems that now the Russians are tasked to maintain the line and to take under complete control everything between the settlements of Pokrovskaya and Pokrovsk. So we are talking about territory below this red line. And this is the task that the Russians are trying to complete during the summer military campaign. This offensive operation will allow the Russians to enter the operational space and to approach the city of Pavlograd and to even establish long-range artillery control or FPV drone control. The distance between the city of Pavlograd and these possible positions of Russians in the area of the settlements of Pokrovsk and Gavrilovka is already less than 60 kilometers, which means that the Russians would be able to use more options to control one of the most important logistic hubs of Ukraine. Now let's move further and let's talk about the city of Konstantinovka. During the previous 12 hours, small changes were recorded between Konstantinovka and Alexeyevo-Drushkovka, and these are the changes on the ground. Furthermore, the Russians improved position significantly along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, shortening the distances to the city of Kramatorsk from many directions. And as for the northern parts, we start receiving first reports that the Russians answered the former Slaviansk power station and that the Ukrainians began fighting with the Russians in this area. This is a very important piece of news. We still haven't received anything on this matter, so we're talking about videos, but something tells me that in coming days we might receive additional reports about the situation in this region. As for the city of Lyman, I expected that during the NATO summit the Russians would announce complete control over the city of Lyman, but we haven't received anything. But it's just the first day. Maybe tomorrow, during the second day of the NATO summit, the Russians will announce this, but something tells me that the Russians most likely will postpone this announcement, and they will do this probably within 2 weeks or something like this, when the NATO summit ends and when the Ukrainians from the northern parts would be forced to fall back in the direction of the Borovo pockets, and then the Russians would be able to make this final announcement. As for the Kharkiv direction, this is also one of the most dynamic directions these days. During the previous 24 hours, changes were recorded through the area along the river Oskol. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, as well as the group of forces north, today reported that Russians, as a result of an offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Petro-Pavlovka. And these are the changes on the ground between the dates. The Russians continue tightening the news to the south of the settlements of Belый Kolodец and Veliki Burluk, and currently the distances between the Pechenegi water reservoir and the city of Kutkovka, the village of Kutkovka, is already less than 45 kilometers, and the Russians would continue tightening the news along this red line with the purpose to either encircle the Ukrainians in this area or to force them to fall back. The battle for the Kharkiv direction continues. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.